Welcome to Rumor versus Truth, your trusted source for facts, where we dissect the evidence behind risky rumors and reveal clinical truths. Today, we'll see how claims we examined in the past have stood up to the test of time.
Well, Don, I feel very overdressed for this episode.
Steve, when I sent you the memo, I said, dress 80s, and you just took that ball and ran with it. So good for you.
Yeah, I think I went a little too far. So for our listeners here, I'm wearing a blonde mullet, a mustache, and some pretty big 80s glasses. Don, do you want to tell everyone what you're wearing? Or should I say just barely wearing?
I have a popped collar and spiky hair. So I feel underwhelming here. So Steve,
Well,
you know,
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, what fun things were you doing in 1985?
Well, I wasn't alive yet, Don. How about you?
I was one crawling around being trouble. And the reason why I mention that is in terms of what PL was doing in 1985, that was the first issue in June of 1985. And it's our 40th anniversary.
And I'm Steve, the pharmacist.
And I'm Don, the pharmacist.
And as you can guess, in this episode, we're going to look through our archives and do a rumor revival, doing some pharmacist letter archaeology to check out claims we reviewed in the past to see whether our verdicts have really stood up to the test of time.
Yeah, sort of like a Back to the Future episode for past claims, right?
Yeah, another good 1985 reference there. So let's go to our first claim here. And it's great that I have this mullet. It fits in perfectly. We're going to warp back to our very first issue from June 1985, where we said that topical minoxidil is only approved for hair regrowth on the head and not for hair loss maintenance. And our past verdict with this claim was that it was true. And we said it can be used as possibly prophylaxis for hair loss. And keep in mind, again, this was back in 1985. Now, Don, what I found out was that oral minoxidil was, as we know, primarily used for high blood pressure at the time. Maybe if your blood pressure wasn't controlled by other products. But they found out through those clinical trials that a lot of the participants had hypertrichosis or hair regrowth on their head and body. And we're talking like 60 to 80% of participants there. And as a result, when they actually started looking at this now for hair regrowth back in the 80s, they had tons of people wanting to join that trial,
Of
right?
course,
I look
yeah.
like I joined it with
Mhm.
this mullet on
Right.
my head. And now, when we talked about this in that first issue of 1985, we were talking about topical minoxidil 2% lotion, which was launched that next year in 1986 as a prescription product. So we're actually ahead of the game on this, thank goodness. It was initially only approved for men, with approval for women actually coming later in the 1990s.
Right. Speaking of minoxidil on your head, looks like some drip down to your mustache too and let it grow as well.
Yes.
So when was it approved actually for OTC use? I don't really remember it being a prescription, the topical
Yeah,
version.
right. We're used to it being an OTC product now, but it actually was approved as an OTC in 1996, way later than I thought. I obviously did not remember this because I was 5 years old, but obviously the rest is history. So, Don, looking back at this claim from 1985 that topical minoxidil is only approved for hair regrowth on the head, not hair loss maintenance, and it can be used as possibly prophylaxis of hair loss. Back then, the verdict was true, but now the verdict is still true. Topical minoxidil, even OTC, is still only approved for hair regrowth, but clinical trials have shown that maybe it could prevent hair loss as well. So I do think this is interesting, Don, to see this claim is still true over the years. Um, we've seen things like 5% minoxidil come on the market, and there's been some other things too, right, with compounding pharmacies. Do you know what's going on with
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. So they're actually putting the finasteride or dutasteride in these topical formulations to, you know, make them work at the site of action versus, a systemic kind of effect. So we're seeing that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, so it keeps on going. And honestly,
Yeah.
we have a great clinical resource online, treatment and prevention of hair loss, that talks about all of those proven remedies, their effectiveness and safety. And I got to be honest, Don, talking about hair loss, I got to lose this mustache. This is driving me crazy right now. So I'm taking
Okay.
this off. Um,
Oh, Steve, such a good disguise. I didn't really recognize
I
you
know,
for
right?
it.
You didn't
Yeah.
even know it was me.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. You make a good spy.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So let's go and fast forward a bit and look at a claim about 20 years ago or so from today. And the claim actually is that Celecoxib, or brand name Celebrex, is safer than Rofecoxib, brand name Vioxx. That's coming from our Rumor versus Truth in August of 2002.
Mhm.
And that past verdict we said was a rumor. And what we actually said was the bottom line is that Vioxx, which is another selective COX-2 inhibitor out at the time, causes fewer GI complications like ulcerations and bleeding than naproxen, but it might cause more adverse cardiovascular effects like hypertension, edema, heart attack, and so on. But we said at the time, but so far, there's no proof that Celebrex is any safer than Vioxx.
Hmm.
So people are probably, okay, we know that's not true today, and that's true. So uh, about a couple years after that, they had some data showing that Vioxx safety concerns basically were being withheld from medical journal
Yeah, that's
publications, and
right.
that's been held by the manufacturer. And that was termed the Vioxx scandal. And what came from that is the FDA getting involved in passing that Food and Drug Administration Amendments Act of 2007.
And what exactly did that law change? I was too young at the
Yeah,
time. What happened then?
right. Yeah, and fortunately, sometimes these laws are reactive, so something has to happen for for something to come into play. So basically, what that law does is increases the FDA's post-marketing surveillance authority. This includes things like developing and using improved adverse event data collection systems,
Mhm.
improve analytical tools to assess potential safety problems, and conduct those screenings after meds reach that market.
Well, I'm glad something good came out of it.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
a good
It's
change.
fortunately, yeah, like I said, it's reactive when it comes to these things, but
Right.
that's just how it is, right? So, looking back on the claim from August 2002 that Celebrex is safer than Vioxx, back then the verdict was rumor, but now the verdict is now it's true. Was a rumor, now it's true. We still have Celecoxib as relative on the market. It can be used for patients with cardiovascular risk and GI ulcer risks with NSAIDs. We do recommend that they use a low Celecoxib dose, such as 100 milligrams twice a day, for patients with those high cardiovascular risks. And you can always add a proton pump inhibitor like omeprazole, pantoprazole, for patients with high GI ulcer risks. And we have resources and everything. Steve, do we have a resource on this as well?
Yeah, actually, we review some of those great tips you mentioned in our Managing NSAID Risks
Mm.
clinical resource, which I refer to all the time. It gives great info on kind of judging that risk and where do patients fall and what are some options. So definitely check that out. And, it's a great segue, Don, to our next claim, also about pain meds. Back in March of 2005, we had this claim we looked at that Darvocet will be taken off the market. And we actually called this a rumor. We said that this only stems from confusion with recent news from the United Kingdom where they yanked copromoxol, an acetaminophen dextro propoxyphene combo product, similar to what we have as Darvocet here. And some history stuff here that propoxyphene, or Darvon, was an oral synthetic opioid we had in the market that we used for things like mild to moderate pain. And it's been around since the 1950s. And we did have a combo product called Darvocet where it was combined with acetaminophen.
Okay, Steve, you're a young duck. You said earlier that you were, right? So,
Right.
was this drug even around in your practice?
No, I've never dispensed this drug. Thank goodness, because it actually got taken off the market when I was in pharmacy school. So they actually found that it causes fatal cardiac arrhythmias even at normal doses in some patients. And it was that year, 2010, that the FDA recommended people don't use it anymore, and it ended up being taken off the market. So regarding this claim we looked at back in 2005, whether Darvocet will be taken off the market, we said it was a rumor then, but the verdict now is true. It has been taken off the market for over a decade now. And I got to ask you, Don, did you ever dispense this? Now that you asked me.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I'm older than you. Yeah, yeah. Uh, I did remember dispensing this medication back when I was a technician way back in the day. We did see that, but I think I just saw some recently back in when I cleaned my parents' cabinet out. There may have been a bottle of that back there somewhere that was collecting dust and
Oh,
uh,
yikes.
yeah, contaminations, everything else. Yeah,
Yeah, they should probably get rid of that because
yeah.
cardiac arrhythmia risks are a bigger focus now with a lot of meds. And we actually have a great resource on this too, QT prolongation algorithms, to help you kind of decide based on the situation whether you need to do more monitoring, change drugs, all sorts of good things. So keep those arrhythmia risks at top of mind.
Right. And on the topic of news about recalls that makes our heart skip a beat, how about the one about benzoyl peroxide? Right. So back in the day, this is maybe about 19 years ago or so, we made a claim that benzoyl peroxide causes cancer, and that was our June 2006 Rumor versus Truth. Past critic was a rumor. We said that reassured patients that there's no proof that benzoyl peroxide causes skin cancer in humans. Now, fast forward today, very recent today, actually. So in March of this year, 2025, the FDA recalled 95 acne products that had benzoyl peroxide and found actually 6 of those to have elevated levels of benzene, which is
Hmm.
a known carcinogen. Um, but to keep things in perspective with those, the FDA limit on benzene is actually 2 parts per million. So anything kind of at that range or below it is acceptable for use. So 2 parts per million is actually an example. It would be like 2 milligrams of something per 1 million milligrams of a substance. So
Yes, that's a really tiny amount. And how is this
yeah.
benzene even getting into the product, Don? I'm curious.
Yeah. So it's not something manufacturers are putting into the product. So
Okay.
be safe about that. Carcinogen, it's known worldwide that you don't put this in products that you're going to put on your skin, obviously, right?
Right.
But the benzene actually may have been introduced through the actual manufacturing process. You're working with, you know, some oil products, that kind of stuff can be part of that whole manufacturing process,
Right.
or it's part of the degradation product of expired benzoyl peroxide. So I did tell you that 6 products actually were showing elevated benzene levels, and the FDA actually noted those 6 products were actually close to their expiration date, like within a few
Hmm.
months or so. So kind of keep that in mind.
Yeah.
So looking back on the claim from June 2006 that benzoyl peroxide causes cancer, back then the verdict was rumor, but now the verdict is it is still a rumor. It's important to specify that even with daily use of these products for decades, FDA says that the risk of a person developing cancer because of exposure to benzene found in these products is actually very low.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the truth is that benzoyl peroxide is still a really important backbone to acne treatment. And trust me, back in
Mhm.
2006 as a teenager, I was using plenty of this.
Oh
So
yeah, me too.
definitely
Yeah,
don't stay away from this. It's still quite
yeah,
useful. And like you said, the risk is
yes,
pretty low.
yep. Staph is still part of that treatment algorithm, right? Um, Cutting back on the FE recall. So watch the FE recall website for the new alerts. Store these products according to manufacturer instructions and throw away any expired products. And speaking of, I never missed a chance to actually promote our previous podcast, right, Steve? Listen to our recent expired meds episode where we actually mentioned this. And to kind of go back at that benzene testing, so stay tuned for actually more info. As of the episode, FDA plans to publish its benzene testing results in medical journals in the near future.
Yeah, and this reminds me, we also have a great clinical resource on pharmacotherapy for acne folks should check out, and benzoyl peroxide
Mhm.
is definitely discussed there. So great resource
It's
there.
definitely popping for sure.
For sure. And then
Sorry.
our last claim here is actually one about GLP-1 agonists like exenatide, a medication class, Don, that seems like it's making more news every single day with new things coming out. And back in 2014, we actually looked at this claim that GLP-1 agonists like Byetta are a good choice for weight loss in patients without diabetes. And back then, we said this was true, but with conditions. We said that don't recommend using GLP-1 agonists for weight loss in patients without diabetes. It's too preliminary.
Mhm.
Now, in 2025, we have semaglutide, liraglutide, tirzepatide that are all FDA approved for weight loss in patients without diabetes. So we definitely flipped the script on that. And also, for example, tirzepatide can be used in patients who are overweight or obese, and they have to have one sort of weight related complication, which could be diabetes, but it could also be something like high cholesterol or high blood pressure or something like that.
Since you're kind of entering this GLP-1 and GIP world here,
Mhm.
I remember, wasn't there one of them actually that was recently approved for like another indication?
Yeah, it just keeps growing. For example, tirzepatide
Mm.
might be what you're thinking of, where it was recently
Yeah.
approved for sleep apnea, so a sleep disorder related to obesity. So it just keeps growing. And it is important to keep in mind, folks, that these products still need to be used alongside a diet and exercise program. You can't just rely on it solo necessarily. So definitely keep those non-drug approaches in mind. So regarding this past claim that GLP-1 agonists are a good choice for weight loss in patients without diabetes, before we said true, but with conditions, and now today, the verdict is true. These meds are obviously now approved for obesity and weight-related issues, and they're also being looked at for even more indications, things like
Mhm.
alcohol use disorder and even Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah, and we'll definitely write about those when they come more to light. And
Yeah.
just to kind of bring back the Byetta, like, who knew that a drug from lizard spit could actually have so many uses and, kind of carry on this drug class?
Yeah, 1,001 uses, and it's growing by the day. It's important to ensure, obviously, that we have the best evidence when we're supporting these decisions. We know that things change. So we can see how, though, newer evidence can lead to new challenges, right, Don? For example, even though these are now approved for these uses, we do have issues with unapproved compounded versions on the market because they're becoming so popular. So we solved one problem, and now we're kind of opening up another box of issues. So we'll see where that leads. And you can see our chart comparing GLP-1 agonists online to kind of compare your doses, costs, and indications that can be really helpful as things change.
So, the bottom line truth for this episode, we uncovered truth over time with research and knowledge. And what a blast from the past. Hindsight is definitely 2020. One
That's for
guarantee
sure.
in healthcare is that our practicalities evolve. They do evolve over time, right? What's rumored today or back in the day is true today, and vice versa, right? Or things could stay the
Yeah.
same. It's kind of a
Yeah, I'm
mixed bag. So,
surprised. I'm surprised that these claims can stick around for so long and obviously get resurrected depending on things that change, like the science, culture, even regulatory things like we talked about. And I love what you said that debunking or proving these claims takes research, which also means it's going to take time. But what's really great about this is learning from the past and looking towards the future. I love that part of this episode. And like you said, Don, constant change in healthcare is always going to happen. And frankly, I think that's what makes it exciting. And that's why I love Pharmacist Letter too, because we help keep our readers up with the times as things change. So stay tuned as developments come and we write about it. And actually, on that note, Don, we have an audience question from the last episode you might be able to help answer. As you remember, we were talking about dyes and risks with those. And this writer asked, you talked about methylene blue being a dye that is used therapeutically, but are there other dyes that you can prescribe or use medicinally? What do you say?
actually, yeah, there is one. Actually, keep in spirit of the episode, there is one with the 80s connection. It's called Berlin Blue or Prussian Blue, also known as Rita Gardes. Um,
Ooh, tear down this rumor, Don. I like this. This is kind of a Berlin Wall situation.
yeah, yeah, good reference, Reagan, Berlin reference, 80s.
Yeah,
We're bringing it all
I
back for
tried.
folks, right? Yep. It's FDA approved, to use for nuclear accidents since it binds to reactive fallout in the body, and then
Hmm.
the exposed patients excrete it, to decrease those risks of actually having, nuclear fallout in your body, basically. And it was
Wow.
used during some nuclear accidents that occurred in the 1980s. There's a very famous one that occurred in the 1980s, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. And so that was a good question. Thank you for sharing that. And if you'd like to have your question about this episode answered next month, please send us a message.
Yeah. Keep sending us those questions. We'd love to answer them. We have a couple more things here. Don, I'll let you take it away.
Sure. Okay. And if you liked what you heard in this episode, be sure to follow, rate, and review Rumor vs. Truth, wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, check us out at trchealthcare.com. You can also help grow our show by telling a friend about the awesome things you've learned about and where you found us.
Yeah, take a look at the show notes or description. We've linked directly to some of the great resources we mentioned today, all throughout the episode, like our article in our June 2025 issues, looking back at our first edition of Pharmacist Letter, as well as all of the other clinical resources related to our vintage claims.
And if you aren't a subscriber, don't miss out on these resources. It would be groovy to sign up today to stay ahead with trusted insights and tools. We are an industry leading, non biased source of information and continuing education.
That's rad, Don. And as a listener to our show, you have access to a special 10% discount on a new subscription. Just use the code podcast1025 when you check out. And if you're a student, even better here, you get access to a free version of Pharmacist Letter. So we've got links in the show notes that take you directly to the right places to take advantage of those awesome deals. So please go check them out.
Also, we need your help compiling more rumors and truth to analyze. Send us your ideas using the Contact Us link at the bottom of your TRC Healthcare homepage, or send us a text right from the podcast show notes.
And we know you've got some good ideas for us to demystify. So join us next time where we will shed light on claims behind sunscreens.
Yeah, that should be a fun one too. And thanks for joining us on Rumor versus Truth, your trusted source for facts, where we dissect the evidence behind risky rumors and reveal clinical truths. See you next time and see what I can trick Steve into wearing.